Good afternoon and welcome to the 152nd of the COVID calls. This is a daily discussion of the COVID 19 pandemic with a diverse collection of disaster experts. My name is Scott Gabriel Knowles. I'm a historian of disasters at Drexel University in Philadelphia. Today we will talk about journalism on campus in the pandemic with Jacob DeCastro and Elizabeth Lawrence. Just a reminder, you can catch COVID Calls live every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on YouTube. Just go to the COVID Calls YouTube channel to watch. You can also watch COVID Calls on Facebook Live and on Periscope. You can hear COVID Calls anytime recorded as podcasts on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, or anywhere you get podcasts. You can also keep up with COVID Calls via Twitter using the handle @US of Disaster or @COVID Calls. Please do help spread the word. Send suggestions for future guests and future topics. Please feel free to suggest yourself as a future guest. Been continuing to get really wonderful suggestions for future episodes. And with the election coming up, we will have a number of episodes just before Election Day, on Election Day, and just after, talking about the pandemic and the election. If you have ideas for those episodes, or if you would like to participate, please send me an email at sgk23drexel.edu, or you can get in touch with me on Twitter @US of Disaster. Thanks. As of today, October 20th, 2020, there are 1,121,365 deaths globally from COVID-19, according to the Johns Hopkins University Coronavirus Resource Center. There are 8,243,223 cases of COVID-19 in the United States, up from 8,201,554 reported yesterday. And now, as of today, there's a total of 220,649 deaths reported in the United States, up from 219,950 yesterday. As a way to bring some humanity to the numbers, I've been reading a life story or a story of advocacy for those impacted by the pandemic, and I'd like to continue that now. The headline, "Deaths of a Mother and Son Are Reminders of the Dangers of COVID, Despite What Trump Says." And this was published October 19th in the Philadelphia Inquirer by Janice Armstrong. President Donald Trump reportedly recovered from COVID-19 after being given several experimental treatments, urging, "Don't be afraid of it and don't let it dominate your lives." Supposedly, we need, in Trump's opinion, to develop herd immunity, a concept that infectious disease expert Anthony Fauci says is dangerous. Meanwhile, almost 220,000 people in the United States have died. Families have been ravaged by not just COVID-19, but also by the carnage it can leave in its wake, as it did with the Logan family from Darby Township, Delaware County. Theirs had been a tight-knit working-class family, but that was before Eric Omar Logan, a 49-year-old correctional officer, began experiencing COVID-like symptoms in early September. His 77-year-old mother, Eleanor Logan, tried to care for him. She left meals outside his bedroom door in their home in the 1400 block of Tribet Avenue. Soon it became apparent that he needed medical attention. After Eric was admitted to Media's Riddle Hospital on September 10th, doctors discovered that he was suffering from double pneumonia as well as COVID-19. Then, Eleanor started feeling sick herself. She underwent coronavirus testing, but was initially told the result was negative. Later, though, the mother of three learned she too had contracted the coronavirus and was admitted to Mercy Catholic Medical Center's Mercy Fitzgerald campus. Going in, she was extremely worried about her son. They were really close, Grant Eldridge, a family friend, said on Thursday. It didn't seem like he was getting better. He was kind of at a standstill. Eleanor died on September 28th. At first, family members grappled with whether even to tell Eric, but wound up doing so. Then a few days later, on October 1st, they were at Earl L. Foster Funeral Home making final arrangements for Eleanor when they got word that Eric too was gone. "We were literally picking out caskets," recalled Eldridge, Eric's best friend from childhood. Mother and son are buried atop each other in the same plot at Mount Lawn Cemetery. After the graveside service, about 300 people met up at Conway Park for a celebration of their lives. It took place on a beautiful sunny afternoon. A DJ played rap songs that Eric had recorded under his stage name, Stop Lee, with Eldridge, who went by Eldrex. Attendees posed for photos by a truck bearing a billboard-sized photo of Eric and Eleanor standing with their arms around each other. Eric was a very encouraging person. He loved kids. When I had my kids, that was like their father more than their uncle, said his sister Dawn Smith of Orlando, Florida. He was just that guy. Friends sold t-shirts emblazoned with Eric's face and favorite sayings to raise money for his 3 children. People reminisced about how they referred to him as the neighborhood's mayor and first responder. The vibe was light. Still, there was no getting past the real reason they had come together. For a mother and son to go at the same time, it's just devastating, said Johnny Tilaferro, 50, a social worker. It's too late for the Logans, but not for us. If reading about a mother and son dying just days apart isn't enough to jolt folks into wearing face masks and practicing social distancing, then I don't know what will. We never thought it would touch us the way it did. It's just a thing until it's on your front step, Eldridge said, and then it becomes real. Okay, we're going to turn to our discussion for today, and very excited to introduce my guests and glad to have them on. Jacob DeCastro is a senior journalism student at Indiana University, Bloomington. He's the editor-in-chief of the Indiana Daily Student, an independent student newspaper covering Indiana University in Bloomington. Prior to this role, he served as a managing editor of Digital Design Editor and Reporter. Elizabeth Lawrence is a senior at the University of Michigan and editor-in-chief of the Michigan Daily, an independent student newspaper covering the university and Ann Arbor. She started her role in January of this year and will finish in December. She oversees the paper's coverage of COVID-19 and manages its remote operations. Jacob and Elizabeth, thanks so much for making time to come on COVID Calls today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So I'd like to start the way I usually do, just to find out where you're calling from and what the COVID-19 situation is looking like there today. Jacob, can I start with you, please?
Of course. Well, first of all, Scott, thank you for having me on today. I'm calling from Bloomington, Indiana. If you don't know where Bloomington is, it's about an hour and a half south of Indianapolis. And the pandemic situation here today is, it's been getting worse. While reported case numbers that the university releases every week show it's been pretty steady. The state of Indiana as a whole moved to fully reopen a few weeks ago. And we are seeing the consequences of that with record-breaking case numbers announced by the state each day. So things are sadly getting worse here.
Can you give us a sense of what percentage of students are on campus and how that breaks down at this time?
So the university took several steps to try to reduce the number of people on campus and de-densify people living in residence halls. So a lot of people are living in singles. I'm not quite sure the university has released the number of people living in town, especially with the large number of off-campus students. But I do know the university is running a little less than 10,000 tests a week. So that is about, I forget what they said. They released recent numbers, and I can check back in on that too. But there are less people than years past. I can tell you that much for sure. And a lot of people have fully online classes. I think about 60% of all classes are taught online.
The campus must feel strange. It's a large and usually very bustling campus.
Yes,
you're finding yourself in class, but in a sort of surreal experience of the big lecture hall with just a few people.
Yep. It's very weird to be in a huge lecture hall with just 10 people. A lot of space. No more tripping over people trying to get out of the classroom after taking like a test or something, that's for sure.
A lot of pressure too. I went to the University of Texas and I remember those big lecture halls, and there were certainly places you could sit where you would not be seen by the professor or the TA. And but in the big lecture hall with 10 students, there's no
way of avoiding that.
Right. Well, thanks for that update from Bloomington. Elizabeth, I want to ask you the same question. Where are you calling from and what's it looking like there?
Yeah, so I'm calling from Ann Arbor, the University of Michigan. I'm living off campus right now, and actually most students live off campus. Usually freshmen tend to live in dorms, and then there's a very large student off-campus population here. And today there was a major development here. We've seen climbing COVID cases among U of M students for the past especially in the past month or so. We have a COVID tracker that tracks cases, and once it started including students not just living in dorms, it doubled the number of COVID cases that was showing up. And our quarantine housing is now at 52.8%, and so we've started having to expand that. So the county health department issued a 2-week stay in place order, telling students to stay in their residences as much as possible. They're allowed to leave to vote, to go to the grocery store, to go to medical appointments, and a variety of other things. Mainly, this is trying to prevent social gatherings, because the health department has noted very much a correlation between COVID cases and larger social gatherings with people living outside of your household.
So this story literally just broke, and I'm putting the link up on Twitter so people can check that out. Is this something that students were prepared for before returning to campus? Was this discussed as a possible option?
Yeah, I think this is something people have been, this doesn't come as a surprise for sure, especially once the university released its plan with regards to testing, and we do not have widespread mandatory testing whatsoever. So we're really concerned about the virus getting out of control, especially with the size of the University of Michigan student population, and we're bringing everyone back to dorms. Or anyone who wants to come back to dorms could. So yeah. Well,
it's not the kind of news that you want to be breaking, but I think it's another testament to the fact, the kind of work that you're both engaged in right now. I mean, your readership is huge, your campuses are huge, and the problems that you're facing there are the size of medium-sized cities in America. So, this is not some small thing that's going on. Elizabeth, I want to ask both of you, maybe we'll start with Elizabeth. Can you tell us a little bit about the way that campus newspaper, your newspaper, is organized? And I think particularly, give us a sense of the scale of it, the newsroom, readership, your reach, but also your relationship to the university leadership, because I think that has been one of the key issues for people trying to understand what's happening on campuses, is that they're finding out that administrations it's not necessarily a democracy always on a college campus. And so news, media, and journalism is really super important on campus in the ways that maybe people hadn't thought of even since back in the 1960s or 70s. So Elizabeth, can you tell us that situation there at Michigan?
Yeah, so the Michigan Daily, we are editorially and financially independent from the university. One of our core missions and purposes is to hold the university administration accountable. We are, I think we're actually one of, if not the biggest student newspaper in the country. This is anecdotally from talking to other student paper editors, but we have over 400 staffers. We have a lot of people working on the Daily, and of course varying levels of commitment, but we just have a lot of staffers to pull from to write stories. So we're able to cover a lot, especially when you compare it to local newsrooms, which have had to cut down on journalists and are really stretched very thin. So yeah, so we have our news section, and that's separated into different beats. We have various university related beats as well as Ann Arbor and city related beats. And we really do function as a campus newspaper, but also as the local newspaper for Ann Arbor.
And your revenue model, then, if you're not receiving money from the university and you have independence, it's advertising generated the way that the Detroit paper would be, or any other newspaper?
Yeah, and we have donations as well. We have a strong alumni connection, and we're looking at those revenue opportunities as well. That's a big one.
400. I don't really know how that compares to the, Philadelphia Inquirer even, or to the Detroit Free Press, right, in Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be much smaller than them, are you?
I'm actually not sure, but yeah, we have a lot of people. And again, it's not like everyone is writing, 5 stories a week, but yeah. it's a lot of us.
And the size of the University of Michigan student body is ballpark figure?
Undergrad, it's around 30,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that must be, I mean, particularly at this time too, when so many students, I know they're dealing with issues on campus, but so many students are distant, have been distant, or will be in the future. Reaching them through online news must be really important. Have you been able to register that in your circulation?
Yeah, well, our online, our site visit numbers have definitely jumped a lot. I have the specific number somewhere, but it's, it's at least I think, it's increased. Our page views per month have definitely increased. And yeah, that's something we're thinking about in terms of spreading the news, and then also with our recruitment efforts. How do we be inclusive of students that are not on campus right now and are purely engaging in a remote format?
Right. Well, Jacob, let me get a sense from you there. Same question about how your newspaper is organized, particularly its relationship to administration.
Yeah, for sure. So our paper is organized similar to the Michigan Daily. We are editorially and financially independent of the university, with our revenue coming from advertisements, donations, and special events that we do. Technically, like if we want to get like really in the weeds here, we're an independent business auxiliary of the university. But with our charter, we have to raise all of our own money and have full editorial control. We have about 100 students actively working for us right now, including about 25 editors, including myself, doing our various news, sports, arts beats, etc. And then with the university, we try, to have that, relationship with the university that is, mutually beneficial, where we will work with them on things they want us to cover, and we will also, hold their feet to the fire if need be, especially with, all of this coronavirus data that the university has that we still don't have, that they just give us to bits and pieces with every week. That's been a really big point of contention with our relationship with the university this semester. But, we try our best to hold the university accountable, as well as, student government and other organizations as well.
I'm going to stick with this issue of the difficulty of the relationship, because the kinds of stories that both of your newspapers have been breaking have been so important that mainstream media outlets have been covering them and have been covering your work covering those stories. And I want to give a shout out to Shivani Patel, who's the production assistant for COVID Calls. And she brought to my attention this Washington Post piece from September 19th, which I'll also put back up on Twitter, in which both of you are discussed in that. And I just want to give an example of a couple of the stories that came to my attention, and maybe you can talk about them a little bit. Jacob, on the 3rd of September, you had an editorial, the editorial page had a piece up in which you asked these questions: are we in a public health crisis? Is this an emergency? Or are we just seeing a spike in cases of the coronavirus? We don't know, because Indiana University won't make its data public. That's a hard-hitting set of questions. Those are the questions on people's minds. And I suppose, students and parents, the idea they're going to send their students back, they do that with the idea that the university is, of course, taking all steps necessary to make sure they're safe. But how do we know? And that's how you framed that question. Can you say a little bit about how that editorial came to be and what the reaction was? Did you get the reaction you were looking for from the administration?
So in a way, we did get a reaction from the administration. Not basically in our editorial, we had 3 questions. We had 3 kind of asks of the university. One was to make its full dashboard public, to update it daily, and 3, to provide the number of available quarantine beds. So since this, has published now a month and a half ago, we still don't have all the information. They release their information once a week on Wednesday for the previous week. So that's already a week's old data plus 3 days, give or take, of lag time. At the beginning, in various webinars, the director of testing said there are about 16 to 20 metrics that IU is looking at, to measure the coronavirus on campus. They have not released all 16 to 20 of them in their weekly updates. But they have told us how much available bed space there is in the one quarantine residence hall on campus. So, we still want, and we're still pushing for more information from the university. They have maintained that by giving it once a week and being able to summarize it, give 3 days to summarize the previous week's data, they're able to provide more context to people who look at it. But, we're asking the question is this data even useful a week later? How do we make decisions now to address how we're going to, take what kind of actions we're going to take in the future if we're having old data? We're telling the university, trust us to be able to look at the data and make our own conclusions, because our health, as the editorial said, our health depends on it.
How are you, these kinds of requests for data, they're also being echoed by faculty senate, by other, I don't know, university trustees or people in the community? Like, what's the ecosystem here of people who are making this kind of a request? Where does your voice fit in?
I think our voice fits in perfectly with, what everybody, at least that I've talked to anecdotally, professors that I've spoken to want. They want this data to be public because these people, staff members, professors, instructors are coming on campus sometimes to teach classes, and they have a right to know how bad are things at IU. The community members, people that live in Bloomington that, aren't affiliated with the university, are still affected by a public, if there's a coronavirus outbreak on campus. It's not like we exist in a bubble. I live off campus right now. People they get their groceries to the same place, people that might not have any connection with the university at all. And people here have the right to know the number of cases every day.
What's the size of the Bloomington newspaper? Are you same size as them, larger?
The Herald Times is like the local daily paper here. They just got bought out by Gannett. And Gannett, sadly, like, other newspapers around the country, has just kind of gutted the Herald Times to the point where I really see, and this is no disrespect to the Herald Times, but I see us as kind of like the newspaper of record here in town. We just frankly have more reporters, and that's no fault of the Herald Times, but we have more reporters covering, the university, the city, that I see us. We also don't have a payroll, which we can get into that too. But I think we're just more accessible to the general public for news.
It's a remarkable point, and I hope people are making note of that in cities that have seen traditional newspapers gutted, the increasing role at this time, the value of student journalism. If it wasn't already apparent, it should be now. Elizabeth, I want to come to you. Same kind of question, and I can't highlight all of the extraordinary reporting. I've just been focusing on the editorial page, but the Michigan Daily published a piece on the 12th of this month. I'm just going to read just one bit from it. It says, the Michigan Daily editorial board calls on the university to help outline precautions necessary to compensate for the lack of state legislation that could follow the end of the state of emergency on October 27th. We encourage students to continue wearing masks, washing their hands, and social distancing on campus. I don't know if that's now been made moot based on the news that just broke there, but can you tell us what that's highlighting? Because what struck me about that is you're having to translate state health policies to the local context, and that's really important. What was the genesis of that piece, and what was the reaction?
Yeah, so essentially that was responding to recently, I believe it was a few weeks ago, although time is weird now, but Governor Gretchen Whitmer extended her state of emergency that she declared in March in order to enact these widespread state regulations, and she was brought to court over it, and a judge ruled against her, which put in jeopardy, or in what's going to happen with these state orders, and how do local public health departments and just localities make this up. So that was, I think the editorial board was responding to that. And I mean, clearly with this stay in place order, yeah, the university and the county have decided they need to make an order of their own in order to actually influence student behavior and stop the spread of COVID, because we know the data clearly shows that the COVID cases are coming from students, and it's the vast majority are, I think it was like in between 18 and 22 years old. So, so they decided to take action on that. Oh, I think you're muted. Sorry.
I have done that twice this week. I'm going to have to now, something's happened this week, and I'm going to have to put a sign up to remind me. Thank you for that. I want to remind folks that you're listening to COVID Calls, and today we're talking about student journalism and the pandemic with Elizabeth Lawrence and Jacob DeCastro. So let's go back. I'd like to hear, I assume this is the normal pattern that the editor-in-chief is elected in these big campus dailies. This is a lot of work. It's a big honor. It's a lot of responsibility, and you do it for 1 year, basically, usually in the senior year, as I understand it. That's how it was when I was in college. And that's how it is for both of you. Is that right? This is a job you'll have for a year?
Yeah, I started second half of my junior year, took a break over the summer, and then this semester.
At the IDS, we do it on semester terms, so I was elected for the fall semester.
I see. Okay. So,
and we had a different editor in the summer and the spring.
Okay, so Jacob, you're coming into this. You were working at the paper, but you were not editor when the pandemic broke out in the spring. So, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and Elizabeth, you were already in the role when the pandemic broke out in the spring. Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, let me. I'd like to hear from both of you on this. And Elizabeth, let me start with you. What was it like to run a newsroom as the pandemic was coming, shut down a newsroom, I guess, go remote, keep things running? I mean, it must have been an extraordinary amount of improvisation. Let us know what that was like.
It was stressful and felt very out of the blue. And I think it felt like that for, many people across the country. We were at the time, extremely wrapped up in the Michigan presidential primary, and Bernie Sanders had just come to campus, and there was a huge rally. This was literally the day before, I think, the university announced that classes were going online, and the World Health Organization announced it was a global pandemic. So it was very chaotic, and we had kind of a final day in the newsroom, and then the editors and I just had a meeting and decided how we were going to run the rest of the semester. We decided we would continue to do production remotely. We would have a Zoom meeting, and then we'd edit stories, and we created PDF papers to upload onto our issue account, as well as publishing online. So we did that, and it was, it was really helpful talking to other student newspaper editors across the country. I think it was really difficult for all of us, but we adapted like everyone did. And, we miss our newsroom a lot, and we're still remote right now. That we've stopped doing PDF papers, and now we're printing papers once a week, and we're publishing online and have our newsletter and all of that.
Student journalism is no different from professional journalism in the sense that traditionally, to report stories, you have to develop relationships, you have to know the beat, you have to get interviews. So you were having to transition what journalism meant literally in real time. How did the reporters handle that?
The reporters were so impressive. I was really concerned that there would be, it's a very overwhelming time for everyone. I was concerned there'd be a lack of interest, and everyone had a lot of stuff going on, but everyone really brought their all and adjusted to the situation well, I think, and was creative about what kinds of stories to write. And we already, we reach out to sources through email, and we'll do phone interviews, and we all know like how to use the internet and all of that stuff. And so it was really just a matter of, time zones, figuring that out was strange. And if when there were protests over the summer on campus, of course we needed reporters to cover those in person. So we were just figuring that out.
Okay, I definitely want to put a pin in that and come back
Yeah.
to that issue of social justice on campus. Jacob, let me. So now that you've told me you started in the fall semester, that makes that editorial that appeared on September 3rd even more impressive, because if I'm not too far off, that may have been your first editorial as editor in chief.
Yeah, it was.
Okay, that's something. So tell us a little bit about that experience from the perspective of the springtime there at IU.
So yeah, the spring, nobody, to be fair, I was not, I was, still a staffer, but I was not really as active. It was kind of like, I was like, I'm gonna take a semester off. So I was actually in DC with an internship when everything happened. So watching it from a distance, and then with all my conversations with the spring EIC over the summer about how I was like, Lydia, how do you plan for something? And she's like, I didn't have time to plan for this. It just happened. So I remember when we went remote, the paper, the mentality among everybody was, the show must go on. So while our print physical production stopped, we were still putting out, at that time, we were a twice weekly paper. So we were putting PDFs out twice a week online and still reporting. And that stayed through the summer. The newsroom was closed, from the time campus shut down in March until the fall semester started. So we basically are doing almost everything remote still. The newsroom is open if people want to go in there and, work socially distanced with masks on. But, we're still, many ways, we're still adapting to this new remote environment because, we're so used to, I remember, the first 3 years of working for the paper, it was just, you would go in and you would work. You'd go in and do your edits with your editor. But now that's all over Zoom, over the phone, over Slack. And I'm pretty sure that's just how it's going to be going forward.
Have you managed to adapt? I'd like to hear both of you about this. I think one of the things, people fall in love with journalism, many of them do in college. And part of that is the esprit de corps of the newsroom. And they get that sense of what it's like to be in the newsroom and the pace of it and, the way journalists start to work. How do you replicate that in a Zoom call or a Slack channel? I know I'm sounding like a person from the 20th century here when I ask this question, but I am from the 20th century, and I was one of these people who fell in love with journalism in high school, actually, my high school paper. I didn't ever pursue it professionally, but I got a sense even that early, and I have worked at newspapers before, of what it's like. But I can't imagine building that kind of a community or keeping it going remotely. Jacob, can you say a little bit more about how you do that?
Yeah, it's not easy. And one of the ways that I tried to kind of bridge that gap is by creating like a mentorship program between older and newer staffers this fall. Because I want to find a way, I remember I started out at the IDS as a page designer, and that's how I learned from the people that, were my bosses now that now work at other places like the Washington Post. Like, I learned from them by sitting next to them and seeing how they work. And that's just super hard to replicate when we're all in our own separate rooms. And I really hope that someday we're able to meet and work again in person. But in the meantime, I think it's just, you have to be more intentional about reaching out to people, about talking to people, making sure that everything is clearly communicated in writing. When people aren't always on the same page, in Zoom meetings, we got to make sure that everything's in writing. We got to make sure that everything is communicated to everybody, maybe that they weren't even involved, because it's hard. There's not that like grapevine, I guess, so to speak. Like, word doesn't just travel through word of mouth as fast as it did when we were all sitting together in the newsroom. And, it's hard, but I think I'm really proud of the staff for adapting.
Elizabeth, how have you adapted the newsroom to remoteness? How do you keep that sense of community going? I like what Jacob's saying about finding a way to have mentorship, sort of peer-to-peer. That seems important.
Definitely. It is really hard, and I miss it so much. But and it's a lot of trial and error too, I would say, because I went in this summer, I thought, oh, it'd be a great idea if we just replicated, we had Zoom production where we're on Zoom every Sunday through Thursday night, and people would come into breakout rooms. And then the first night I did it, I was like, wow, I cannot be on Zoom all day in class and also for all hours of the night. This is not going to work. So instead, we've been doing once a week for a couple hours. I tell all the managing editors to come in and tell them to encourage their staffers if they want to drop by and say hi or have a question. I can send them into a breakout room. So we've been trying that. I don't know how successful it is. We wouldn't say we get a ton of people, but for the people who do come, it's a lot of fun. And we've done things like we did a trivia night to celebrate the Michigan Daily's birthday. It was our 130th birthday. Mm-hmm. And different sections have been doing their own sort of bonding events as well.
So let me, Elizabeth, just stay with you with this. I want to get to a sense of what's happening on campus vis-a-vis the political tensions in the state. I mean, both of you are in states that in recent memory have voted either for Republicans or Democrats. So I guess we call those purple states. Michigan has tended to trend more blue, but not in the last election. And Michigan certainly has been in the news a lot with Gretchen Whitmer and with the protests at the State House, the armed protests, and some of those photographs, I think, crystallized early on for people that we were in the middle of a national struggle over a pandemic that was going to be played out with visuals and with language and terms that we wouldn't have thought of, about masks or about social distancing. I'm sure that must manifest itself on campus. I mean, the student body is a reflection of the population of the state. It may not be a perfect approximation because there are obviously class issues there and cost issues there, but most state schools do reflect the population overall or try to. So I guess with that as background, could you take us a little bit into what it's been like to experience and to report the tensions on campus? Are there anti-mask activists on campus? Are there anti-Whitmer advocates on campus? Break that down for us.
So actually, we have not seen those tensions play out as much on campus. And I think, it might be, we do have a pretty large out-of-state population. I think, mostly the protests we've been seeing are, protests against the administration trying to get more COVID protocols. And I'm trying to think if I'm missing anything that happened over the summer in terms of if there were any stay open protests. I feel like there might have been, but not originating from students. I think, mostly that we absolutely cover those tensions, and I think they do trickle down to campus, but maybe, it's not as explicit right now. We're gearing up for the election because we think that maybe some of the underlying tensions will really erupt on campus as well, and campus won't be excluded from that. But we haven't seen that as much right now.
And you had staff covering the protests at the State House?
Yes, we did. We sent a reporter there.
And tell us a little bit about what it was like to cover the murder of George Floyd and the social justice protests that followed. What was that like? Because you not only have the responsibility to cover that in Michigan, but also on your campus.
Yeah. So I was not in charge of the paper over the summer, but our summer staff did a really comprehensive job of covering the protests on campus, but also we sent a team of reporters kind of across to Detroit and then around Metro Detroit. They had a whole series of just kind of documenting the different protests there. And, I think it was such a historic time, and it's definitely, I think it's the impact, the immediate protests on campus and, like the influx of social media posts, and that has seemed to at least halter a little bit in terms of the University of Michigan community, but it's trickled into, we had our graduate students went on strike, and they had demands about reevaluating our police force, diverting funds from our police force. Our university is not made explicit decisions about that yet, other than creating a task force to discuss it. But yeah, it's the effects are still playing out.
So here you have yet another. I mean, it's hard enough to get good reporting and updates from the administration about the public health crisis, and now you have this other layer on top, which is how will the university comport itself in this time in which broad base of people are calling for social justice? Is that illuminated conflicts that the pandemic had not illuminated?
Yeah. So you're asking, has it illuminated the racial justice aspect of the, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there were students talking about course curriculum and professors that, incidents with professors, saying the N-word or saying things that, should not be said and make students uncomfortable, and how the universities respond to that. And we've had a lot of, a long history of, racist incidents, and how, and a kind of a lack of a firm response from the university and firm consequences for that. And that's an ongoing conflict, and it's been brought renewed attention to that.
Jacob, let me get the same sort of sense from you. And it looked like you've made some modifications. You may have also done this at Michigan, Elizabeth, but Jacob, it looks like you've made some modifications to the newspaper as well, in terms of the new section and new focus for Black voices on campus and things like that. Maybe you could speak generally about what it was like to be part of the paper through this time in that regard, but also how you see the paper as an instrument of anti-racism on campus.
Yeah, for sure. So, like the Michigan Daily over the summer, we covered the protests here in Bloomington and in Indianapolis, following the murder of George Floyd. And the staff did a phenomenal job over the summer of telling the stories, with the respect they deserve. Here in Bloomington over the summer, at the end of the summer, there was an attempted lynching of a Black man just outside Bloomington that, sparked a huge protest. Where, a protester was struck by a car at this protest. She was hit by a car, and our staff covered that, as well as, moving on into this current semester, there's been a lot of protests surrounding the student government, and how it, is it representative of the demands of students? Is it representative of students' concerns? And we've been covering those protests as well. And then to answer your second question, over the summer, we were talking about how we can use our platform at the paper as a way to, amplify, underrepresented voices. So that is what prompted us to launch, in consultation with the faculty advisor for the National Association of Black Journalists chapter here at IU. She had the idea to create a Black Voices section. So that section is really great because it's just a platform, almost like a blank canvas for, Black and other underrepresented students to share their work, their perspectives, their art, and to also get paid for that. And we've been I've been really impressed, with the support that we've gotten, from the community, from students, from faculty, and everything coming out of that section just amazes me. It's really great work. And I'm really happy that we've been able to provide a space for people to share their work in a way that's not like tokenizing. And I think that was one of the biggest concerns. But so far that has not been the case. And I'm, really proud of that section.
Well, congratulations on that. That's an important addition to the paper, it sounds like. And I guess I'd like to also get a sense from you, same question I had for Elizabeth, about, in a state that reflects the many different tensions pulling America apart at this time, either with racial justice or with the pandemic. How's that playing out on your campus, and how is it playing out in the pages of your newspaper?
So the first part, I don't think, on campus, we haven't really seen like the widespread like protests against wearing masks or the public safety measures that both the university and the county plus the state have put into place. There hasn't been protests, thankfully, about the effectiveness of wearing masks in public to avoid the spread of COVID-19. But one concern, and I've read, shouldn't do it, but reading like Facebook comments on our posts is people are like, why are you still covering? People are tired of, simply put, people are tired of coronavirus. I'm tired of coronavirus too, and I'm sure both of you are. But this is a public health matter that affects all of us, and we need to cover it. We need to cover how the county is handling Greek housing. We need to cover the limits on private gatherings. We need to cover why the state moved to fully reopen, and why they're still reopened fully despite a spike in cases. So just because I think people are tired of hearing about coronavirus, it's not any less important, and we will still continue to put it in our paper and online.
I guess it's become a sort of truism now that you shouldn't read the comments. Anytime I publish an op-ed, I'm pretty studiously avoid the comments. But you're both editors. You don't have that. Well, maybe you do exert that luxury. I'm not sure, but I'd like to know. I mean, I guess it's always attention in journalism, particularly if you pay attention to having a robust op-ed page, that you want to give a space. Needs to be a space for thoughtful discussion. Thoughtful discussion is in short supply in America right now. How have you balanced that in this time? What kinds of tools do you have, or do you run the pieces and let the comments fly and hope for the best? How do you manage that? Elizabeth, let me hear from you first on that.
Yeah, definitely some comments just kind of make me laugh. Like, we've had a few comments, this newspaper is so pessimistic, it's terrible, like, unsubscribe. Where, sorry, this is not a very optimistic
news
time.
In the middle of a pandemic, and you're not supplying that for them.
I guess not. Yeah. No, I think we obviously, you have to balance different perspectives, but at a certain point, when it's a matter of public health and, experts and epidemiologists are saying a certain one thing, there's a difference between, I guess, including all perspectives and then including perspectives that come from a fundamentally flawed logic and logic that it could really put people in danger, making sure not to give a platform to that.
So that's important, because, even on Twitter right now, they're taking down, or they're putting warnings up, sometimes from tweets from the President of the United States. So you won't publish an op-ed, or you will take down a comment in which somebody's putting forward public health information that you feel is incorrect?
Yeah, so we actually this reminds me that we need, we're working on a specific protocol for how to handle comments, especially. We've been getting a lot more comments on our Instagram, especially, and I think we've taken down a few, I'm thinking of one that just are blatantly spreading, false and harmful or racist rhetoric, like those kinds of things. We'll take that down.
Just want to remind everybody that you're listening to COVID Calls. We're talking about student journalism and the pandemic with Jacob DeCastro and Elizabeth Lawrence. Jacob, I'd like to get a sense from you on that same question, how you handle free speech issues, and particularly, the president makes no apologies for the fact that the press is, as he sees it, the enemy of the people. I've never heard him say, except for student newspapers. So my sense is that the press in general is lumped in. What's your editorial stance on that? And I'd like to hear how you're dealing with these kinds of issues that Elizabeth raised about, even in the comments, there can sometimes be really toxic things. Is it your role to police that?
Well, we try our best to kind of stay hands off on our comments, but we do have our comment policy. If you're attacking someone, if it's becoming personal, if it's false, if it's just blatant disinformation, or something that's just, obscene, we will not let that run and we'll take that down. That's, this comment policy was originally just for our website, but we have since adapted it to our social media accounts because we want people to be able to have thoughtful, insightful discussion in the comments, whether it's on the website or on social media. But when things turn, negative, that's just not something that we're here to condone. So when things are in violation, we have like a 3 strikes policy for comments. If you make 3 things in violation, we will just remove your ability to comment on our posts. We don't want to do that, but it's what's fair to people that want to come for a discussion. And we've also had people submit letters to the editor, and we're fine. We run letters to the editor, but if the things inside the letter wouldn't meet our own like fact checking policy, for example, we're not going to let our opinion page be a space for people to put false information out there. So I guess that's kind of our philosophy for our role as a forum.
Right. Well, we're almost up on time. I want to get a couple more questions in. Remind folks you can get your own questions in. Just put them in the YouTube live chat, or you can put them up on Twitter. Just be sure to tag me at US of Disaster. Every journalist I know has some stories in mind. Maybe they're not even always the stories that get the most circulation or the most traffic, but they're the ones that they feel like capture the moment. And Jacob, I wonder if you might share one with us that is in your paper or in another paper, but maybe from yours, if you can think of one that you feel really just sort of captures the grain of this moment on campus.
So, am I trying to think something like that was like kind of fun or creative? I can't really think of anything off the top of my head, but I do know something fun that we did was we ran an experiment to see how long it would take to get, with all these concerns about the election about mail-in voting. We did a little experiment to see how long it would take to get mail all the way across the country. So we mailed out 31 letters, as far away as Florida, California, around the state, to the East Coast, to every region, just to see if the mail was really slowed down. And our conclusion was a little bit. It's a little bit slower than what, your expected delivery time is 1 to 3 days. Things take, 3 to 4 days on average. We did lose one piece of mail, en route to its to the person that we wanted to do. Which actually asked the editor. It's kind of funny that was the one that chose to get lost in the mail. But yeah, that was just something kind of a little anecdotal, but also just to kind of like confirm or deny people's suspicions about the mail and how long people need to take to mail in their ballots if they're going to vote absentee.
That's a perfect illustration of what I had in mind, because if you told me the story a year ago, I would have said, boy, I don't know how long this guy's going to be in the editorial chair. I mean, that seems like a strange story to run, but you did investigative postal journalism from there. And the way I hear it I'll look for it in the paper, but the way you've described it gives me a fair amount of confidence. Maybe things run a little slower, but you can still count on the Postal Service to get the mail there.
Yes. Basically just, if you want to be safe, if you get it, just put it in the mail as soon as it gets there, fill it out, put it back in the mail, is the best way to know if it gets there, given enough time to get there safely.
Elizabeth, that's a pretty cool story. I'd like to hear, what have you been doing there? Maybe a story that you've done that you also think really captures this moment in time.
Yeah, I'm also having a hard time thinking of just one story because we've run. I mean, I'm thinking of like a big story that we ran recently was about COVID-19 in fraternity and sorority life, kind of talking about a lack of transparency from the university as well with that data and some clusters that have popped up because of parties. So that's in terms of, just like kind of a serious encapsulation of some of the frustrations and dangerous things that are happening on campus. For a more positive story, so we're not just the pessimistic Michigan Daily, we ran a story yesterday on Little Free Libraries, like this community, that this was in our arts section actually, community culture, about those little shelves in neighborhoods where you give a book, you take a book, you give a book back. And so we spoke to, I think, a founder of that's a similar program in Detroit and talked to some students who've created those in their own neighborhoods. So I thought that was a great story that really illustrated some of the ways people are trying to stay together, and trying to uplift and empower each other through a really scary and difficult time.
Thanks for that. It's been a theme we've talked about a lot on COVID calls. You mentioned the weirdness of time right now. And there's just sort of a weirdness of not having to apologize for normal life. But normal life still happens once in a while, and those stories are still important to hear and to read. I'll make sure that we share those links to the stories on Twitter after the program is over. Just wanted to hear from both of you before we break. We talked about the way you're covering testing and getting information from the administration. That seems like that's going to be maybe the defining beat for both of you as you go through the fall. Do you think you're going to have to add more reporters to that? What are you going to have to do to keep up with that story? And Elizabeth, particularly, put this question to you first, considering the news that's breaking out of Ann Arbor literally today about how that's going to be harder now.
Yeah, we definitely we have recruited a lot of new reporters, which is needed to keep up with all of these different testing updates and COVID updates. We don't have a specific COVID beat really, just because it's influenced so many different aspects of the things we cover, but we've put more reporters on our administration beat this semester, and then we have a campus life beat, which more kind of covers student issues, that we've devoted a lot of reporters and our senior news editors to help guide coverage with that. So we're going to need to keep on this story, and especially with the stay in place order that was issued today.
Jacob, do you foresee having to modify newsroom operations it seems like you've been on it, but this is a story that can change really rapidly, as Liz was saying, literally change there today.
Yeah. We have plenty of, like Elizabeth and the Michigan Daily, we don't actually have like a dedicated, in a way, we have people covering coronavirus as it affects, campus or, Greek life or the city. And every reporter is kind of touching coronavirus one way or another. So I think, we're just trying to have as many people try to find these stories about how coronavirus is affecting different aspects, different facets of the community. So rather than just, we do have, a couple of people that coronavirus is their beat. We have people also covering, people on like the city beat covering how the city's responding, or people, in student life, or how are student orgs adapting to COVID restrictions, and so on. So yes, the story is not going away anytime soon.
It's a meta level.
And we'll keep covering it.
It permeates everything. It absolutely permeates everything. Well, just on the way out, I'm sure anybody listening would like to know after this discussion, Jacob, are you going into journalism, or
I would like to. I'm keeping my options open at this point. Whether it's, working communications or journalism, we'll see. But I really enjoy the work that I do, and I'd love to keep doing it.
The experience of being the editor has built your excitement for continuing to go in this work. Yeah, good. Elizabeth, same question for you. Is that the pathway after graduation?
Yeah, that's the plan. I love it, and I think probably kind of addicted to it. So yeah. And super quickly, I didn't mention this when you asked the question about projects or how our stuff is covered, racial justice protests and on campus. Our opinion section and our Michigan in Color section, which is a section we've had that's by and for students of color on campus, collaborated on this really cool project called Miseducation. That was a series of stories about kind of truths about anti-Black racism and policing that have not, our university and just in general have not been delved in as much. So just wanted to mention that because they worked really hard on that, and that was great. Yeah.
Good. Thanks for that. Well, just super impressed with the work you're both doing. Please keep it up. We need it. We all need it. And I would say also that as a person who works in a university myself, we need student journalists to help us more than people sometimes realize, that you can get at truths and facts and data in ways that faculty can't or members of the community can't. So just, completely in awe of what you're accomplishing right now and all the work that's going into it. And thanks a lot for coming on COVID Calls to talk about it today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yep, thank you again.
Just to remind everybody, you've been listening to COVID Calls, and you can catch COVID Calls every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Tomorrow we'll have a discussion about data and the pandemic, so please do join us for that. And stay healthy, everybody. See you tomorrow, 5 o'clock.